people realize this, but today, as we speak, Israelis are lining up for gas masks and cleaning out their bomb shelters.
A common sight in Jerusalem these days, gas mask distribution as a possible armed conflict with Iran seems to be looming.
I hope we will not need the mask. We will not have to use them. It is very, very scary.
Iranian President Ahmadinejad has made one of his sharpest attacks yet on Israel. He says there's no place for a Jewish state in a future Middle East.
I've heard President Obama say he won't let Iran produce a nuclear weapon and that he's a staunch defender of Israel.
My commitment to Israel and Israel's security is unshakable. It is unshakable.
But today, I'm not so sure. It's been really scary to hear many of his longtime supporters questioning his commitment to Israel.
I believe we are seeing a dramatic change in the relationship between the United States and the State of Israel, and that it is being orchestrated by President Barack Obama.
So I decided to look into it, and what I found really surprised me. The more I learn about his record, the less confident I am that President Obama really does stand with Israel in these critical moments. I have a special place in my heart for Israel. I love the energy, the people, the food. I even met my husband there on a birthright trip. I've seen that Americans and Israelis have a lot in common. And supporting democratic Israel has always been a true American value, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. So when it was time for me to vote for the first time in 2008, I didn't doubt for a moment that the strong relationship would continue, no matter who won. I consider myself pretty liberal. After 8 years of Bush, Barack Obama inspired hope, and I was proud to cast my vote for him.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, and most of my fellow students, were confident that President Obama could fix our economic problems, advance peace, and be a great friend to Israel. But today, I'm having second thoughts, particularly as I learn about the president's record across the greater Middle East.
I think the opinion in Israel on Barack Obama is a very polarized, very divided opinion.
There was this outpouring of excitement that a U.S. president had reached out to the Arab world. And I think part of it was catching on to the excitement in the United States among younger people that it would be a new type of presidency.
I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world.
It was an effort to repair American credibility with one audience, the Arabs and the Muslims, but it seemed to pay very little attention to the political realities in Israel.
But the strategy didn't exactly work out as the president had intended.
The favorability rating of the United States in much of the Arab world is lower now than it was under President Obama than it was during the Bush administration.
Right. If you look what happened until today, since his speech in Cairo, you understand that there's a big difference between nice speeches and reality in the Middle East.
And it didn't seem like the president did a good job handling the revolutions of the Arab Spring. Instead of becoming more open and democratic, it feels like the Middle East is becoming even more extreme than before, a real danger to Israel.
I think American policy when it comes to the Middle East has been, way off. And I don't know what's to blame, whether it's intelligence or people didn't realize what was going on.
Neil argues that President Obama blew it when it came to Egypt.
No, they just looked like they hadn't a clue. It's as simple as that.
It's been interpreted as a beginning to back away from President Mubarak.
We do not want to send any message about backing forward or backing back.
The scenarios that the Israelis are looking at involve a transition not to some kind of peaceful and amicable democracy, but to a Muslim Brotherhood-dominated regime, which then pursues an aggressive policy towards Israel. This is a high-probability scenario, and as far as I can see, the president isn't considering it.
I think that the Muslim Brotherhood is one faction in Egypt. They don't have majority support in Egypt.
Egypt has a new president this evening, Mohamed Morsi, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Morsi wants to impose Islamic law, limit the rights of women. His party is not pro-American, as Mubarak was for decades, and he is fiercely anti-Israel.
It is a nightmare for this country's secular military, an experiment in political Islam that could now spread from here in Tahrir Square across the Middle East.
decades of peace, the historic treaty that Israel signed with Egypt may soon fall apart.
What's happened in Egypt and Libya and now in Syria is something that I think shouldn't concern just Israel, but should concern the entire world.
With the Middle East growing more and more hostile, I think America's support for Israel should get even stronger. And yet, the president has been sending mixed signals.
Mr. Obama reasserted his support for Israel, but he also suggested there is a need for the U.S. to give Israel some tough love. The president leaves tonight for a 6-day trip that will take him to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Germany, and France. He will not be visiting Israel.
Now, coming into an election season, there's definitely been a shift, at least in the rhetoric, that he has taken much more focus on proving that he's a friend of Israel.
I'm proud that even in these difficult times, we fought for and secured the most funding for Israel in history. Our military and intelligence cooperation has never been closer.
To this day, the United States continues to provide Israel with more military and financial assistance than anyone else, and I think that's not a coincidence.
But on some other fundamental issues, the president has not been so helpful. The status of Jerusalem, Israel's capital city, is a prime example. Early on, it sounded like President Obama stood side by side with Israel on the issue of Jerusalem.
Jerusalem will remain the capital of Israel, and it must remain undivided.
Soon after, his position changed dramatically.
The fact is that Jerusalem is Israel's capital, and so I was simply stating the fact. Well, the issue of it being undivided, that word was poorly chosen. In the two states, what do you envision as the capital then? You know, Charlie, I'm going to let the parties sort that out. Aren't these things that you felt through in your head? They are, but they aren't necessarily things that I should say on Charlie Gibson's Evening News.
Now, 4 years later, I wonder why the administration no longer says that Jerusalem is Israel's capital.
What city does this administration consider to be the capital of Israel? Jerusalem or Tel Aviv? What's the capital?
We know our position.
Does that mean that you do not regard Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
Jerusalem is a permanent status issue. It's got to be resolved through negotiation.
Tel Aviv or Jerusalem?
Seems to suggest that you do not regard Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Is that correct?
I have just spoken to this issue.
Could you just give us an answer?
A lot of buzz out there that the Democratic Party platform rejected the language that was in the platform 4 years ago, 8 years ago, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, also deleting a reference to Israel as being America's staunchest ally in the Middle East.
That's right. Well, if you asked me just a few moments ago why they did it, well, I asked the DNC, and the answer was that they are simply following what the Obama administration's policy is.
And I'm bothered by how they chewed Israel out when Israel announced new apartments in one of Jerusalem's large Jewish neighborhoods.
2 days ago, the Israeli government announced it would advance planning for new housing units in East Jerusalem. Why? And at the request of President Obama, condemned it immediately and unequivocally.
This was an affront, it was an insult.
And the announcement of the settlements the very day that the Vice President was there was insulting.
Jerusalem is not a settlement, it's our capital.
Hillary Clinton called up Netanyahu and talked very tough to him, and worse, they made it public through their spokesperson. That is terrible. That is a dagger.
That neighborhood, Ramat Shlomo, where some housing is going to be built, some apartments are going to be built, is an area that was established in 1995 when President Clinton was in office and Prime Minister Rabin was in office. And we frankly didn't have those kind of disagreements then. Unfortunately, we've seen a sharp break in the policy of the Obama administration from past administrations on the question of Jerusalem.
It's not just Jerusalem. The president also seems to be undercutting Israel's borders.
We believe the borders of Israel and Palestine should be based on the 1967 lines with mutually agreed swaps.
Everyone knows that the 1967 lines are simply indefensible for Israel, and for the president to emphasize that, I think, was a very big mistake.
Israel will not return to the indefensible boundaries of 1967.
I believe that President Obama and his administration wanted to intimidate Israel so as to get concessions which Israel would not normally provide because it would affect its own security.
And then I noticed that President Obama and his staff have been pretty open about their disregard for Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Former U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates lashed out at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, calling him an ungrateful ally, and said he was responsible for diplomatically isolating Israel and harming American interests.
Look, it's not just that Secretary Gates made a comment of Netanyahu and Israel being an ungrateful ally, but there are recordings of President Obama speaking to President Sarkozy about how much he doesn't like Netanyahu.
Barack Obama and Nicolas Sarkozy are now being quoted from a conversation they had about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
This is what President Sarkozy is reported to have said. I can't stand him anymore. He's a liar. President Obama reportedly replied, "You may be sick of him, but me, I have to deal with him every day."
It seems like the president has been openly hostile to the prime minister for a while.
More now on that White House meeting late yesterday between President Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Unlike past White House meetings with Israeli leaders, this time no press, only underscoring the tense relations.
The president was extremely rude to him, treated him as though he were a third world tyrant, and instead of one of allegedly the United States' closest allies.
While President Obama thankfully has maintained America's military aid, it really looks like he has hurt Israel strategically in other key areas. Yet now, close to the elections, we're being told that President Obama is the most pro-Israel president in recent history.
I'm proud of our record. I believe that no president since Harry Truman has done more for Israel's physical security than Barack Obama.
I'm not sure I believe it anymore.
Israel's ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, has reportedly said U.S.-Israeli relations are facing their worst crisis in 35 years.
We should not worry about the United States-Israel relationship. We should worry about the Obama administration-Israel relationship.
The thing I'm most worried about is the president's approach to Iran, the most dangerous threat facing Israel and the free world today.
Referring to Israel as a cancerous tumor that should be cut. The Islamic Republic's supreme leader says that Iran will help any nation or group that confronts the country.
In a televised speech, Ahmadinejad said the very existence of the Zionist regime is a, quote, affront to all world nations. He called on all human communities to, quote, wipe out this scarlet letter from the forehead of humanity. Another call for the destruction of Israel.
We have to be very realistic about this. We now think they have close to 5 bombs worth of enriched uranium.
The president says tough sanctions are at the center of his Iran policy, but it seems like they could be a lot stronger.
And we have imposed the most comprehensive, the hardest hitting sanctions that the Iranian regime has ever faced.
Certainly tough talk, but does it add up? No.
The U.S. has exempted 11 nations from financial sanctions in connection with their purchases of Iranian oil.
Right now, the President of the United States, the Secretary of State, have put their reputations on the line. The U.S. is implementing the toughest sanctions in history on Iran. That's true. But all these loopholes still exist, and they exist because the U.S. government lets them.
Mr. Secretary, I have to be honest with you, I'm extremely disappointed. The clock is ticking. The published reports say we have about a year. Now, when are we going to start our sanctions regime robustly? 6 months before the clock has been achieved? Before they get a nuclear weapon?
Nothing that we have done has caused the regime in Tehran to alter its course on the nuclear development program at all.
I think right now, at least on the face of it, is the Obama administration's highest foreign policy priority is to prevent a Israeli strike on Iran.
It's widely believed that Panetta and others have been pleading, practically pleading, with the Prime Minister not to do anything before the election.
Washington is against unilateral Israeli action. The Obama administration saying there is still time for sanctions to work.
Already there's too much loose talk of war. For the sake of Israel's security, America's security, and the peace and security of the world, Now is not the time for bluster. Now's the time to let our increased pressure sink in.
Barack Obama will be remembered for one thing: if Iran develops nuclear weapons during his watch. That's what he'll be remembered for, whether he passes health care, whether he restores the economy. This is a world-transforming event.
When I stop to think about the situation and the possible outcomes, it really scares me. Rather than doing what we can to make Israel safer, we have allowed Iran's nuclear program to inch toward the point of no return.
So there should not be a shred of doubt by now. The chips are down. I have Israel's back. I have Israel's back.
Did very publicly say, we've got Israel's back. What does that mean?
What it means is that historically we have always cooperated with Israel with respect to the defense of Israel. It was not a military doctrine that we were laying out for any particular military action.
I'm just not sure that the president really does have Israel's back. And I know I'm not alone.
A number of surveys have shown that Israelis are fearful or suspicious of Obama, especially in a second term.
But I think he's handled the relationship with Israel in a way that has encouraged Israel's enemies.
The great fear among many American supporters of Israel, Jews and Christians alike, is that a second Obama term could be more dangerous for Israel than the first Obama term was.
I don't even want to imagine things getting more dangerous. There's a troubling pattern that has developed over the last 4 years, and I think it's only going to get worse.
Even liberals, they understand that President Obama is biased against Israel. And I regret that, because I know that Israel and the American people, we have the same future, we have the same values, we all love democracy, human rights, and we have the same enemies as well.
Israel may soon find itself fighting for its very survival once again. And while I am proud that Israel is strong enough to defend itself, I'm extremely disappointed that President Obama has managed to put Israel into an even more difficult position than it needs to be.
What Israel needs to know is that the United States of America will be standing with it shoulder to shoulder without a ray of sunlight between us when it comes to safeguarding its people, its security, and its right to exist in peace.
Today, the world is changing before our eyes, but it is not the change I hoped President Obama would bring. This time around, Obama won't be getting my vote. As Americans, we should be staying true to our values and true to our friend Israel. And in 2012, that friendship starts with the president.